Put that down. You don't belong here. The shout sliced through the quiet buzz of the grocery store like a gunshot. I froze, my hand still resting on the handle of my cart, as a teenage boy lunged forward and yanked the bag of tomatoes right off the conveyor belt. He couldn't have been more than 16, pale, wiry, and radiating that particular brand of arrogance that only comes from never being told no. People like you shouldn't buy this stuff, he sneered, clutching my groceries like he'd just won a prize. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him, but when he spat out the word you again, with a sharp, ugly emphasis, every head in line turned to look. The cashier froze, scanning gun midair. I could feel the temperature of the room drop. The word stung, not because I hadn't heard that tone before, but because it still carried the same poison it always had. My name's Alicia Carter. I'd been in Maplewood Estates for barely 2 weeks, keeping a low profile as I settled into the neighborhood I'd soon be protecting. Nobody here knew me, and I preferred it that way. Just a woman in jeans and a t-shirt, shopping for dinner after a long day. No uniform. No badge. No hint that I was the police commander for the entire city of Oak Ridge. I took a breath and kept my tone even. Son, those are my tomatoes. Please hand them back. The boy's eyes widened with mock fear, and then like a switch flipping, he stumbled backward dramatically. Mom, he's threatening me, he cried, his voice cracking as he raised it high enough for the whole store to hear. For a second, the world seemed to go still. Then from the next aisle, I heard the sharp click of heels hitting tile. Fast, angry, expensive. What is going on here? A blonde whirlwind in pearls and entitlement rounded the corner like a storm front. Her voice was already rising before she'd even seen me. Get away from my son, she screeched, shoving between us. Her perfume hit me like a wall, something synthetic, strong, the kind that announces a person before they speak. This had to be Greg Morrison's wife, though I didn't know that yet. The woman everyone in the HOA message board referred to reverently as Mrs. President. She whipped out her phone, manicured finger trembling in righteous fury. I'm calling the police. There's a violent person threatening my child. I stayed still, voice low, calm. Ma'am, your son took my groceries. No one's threatening anyone. She ignored me completely. Hello? Yes, 911. We need police now. 20 cars if you can. There's a dangerous person attacking us at Fresh Mart. Her voice cracked on cue, fake tears bubbling up like bad theater. Around us, customers began to film, some out of concern, others for entertainment. I could have stopped it right there. I could have flashed my badge, called off the farce, and walked out. But years on the force had taught me that sometimes it's better to let people reveal who they are. So I quietly took out my phone and started recording, making sure her every word hit the mic. She stepped closer, fingers shaking inches from my face. You think you can come into our community and act like you belong? I'm on the HOA board, sweetheart. I'll make sure you regret ever showing your face in Maplewood Estates. That name, Maplewood Estates, hung in the air for a second. It was the same gated neighborhood I'd moved into just 14 days ago. As she ranted, the first sound of sirens echoed faintly outside. One, then another, then several more. Her expression twisted into satisfaction. Good, she hissed. Let's see what the cops think of you. I didn't flinch. I just gave a small, knowing smile as the flashing lights painted the store windows red and blue. She had no idea those sirens weren't coming for me. They were coming to me. And as she straightened her blazer, proud of the chaos she'd summoned, I whispered under my breath, just loud enough for my camera to catch it. You just called your own boss. Send 20 cars. The man's voice bellowed through the phone, echoing off the polished tile floors of Fresh Mart. His face was flushed crimson, veins bulging in his neck, spit flying with each syllable. Shoppers froze mid-aisle as he shouted orders like a battlefield general. We've got a dangerous suspect. She's threatening my family. Send everyone you've got. His words were frantic, shaking, dripping with false fear. But the real irony? Every single one of those 20 cars he demanded reported directly to me. Through the glass doors, I could already see the flashing red and blue lights slicing through the daylight. Sirens wailed closer and closer, their reflections painting the floor like a disco of chaos. Within minutes, 6 patrol units screeched into the parking lot, followed by another 4 in the distance. Officers spilled out, hands hovering near their holsters, ready for the unknown. Customers parted like waves, their phones raised, recording every second. Greg Morrison, the same man who had just called me a threat, stood tall with his arm protectively draped over his teenage son's shoulders, playing the perfect victim. "Officers! Over here!" he yelled dramatically. "That woman attacked my son. She tried to grab him. She was shouting, 'She's dangerous.'" His voice cracked with fake panic, his hand trembling just enough to look convincing. Bradley, still clutching the now bruised tomatoes, sniffled on cue, mumbling, "She scared me." I could see the first responding officer, Sergeant Lopez, pause when he recognized my face. For a split second, confusion crossed his eyes. His jaw tightened, and I gave him a subtle nod. "Not yet." He understood immediately. "Protocol over position. Keep it clean." "Ma'am," Lopez said formally, turning toward me as his partner held up a hand to keep Greg at bay. "Can you tell us what happened?" I stayed calm, my voice steady. "This young man took items out of my cart, used racial language, and refused to return them. His father arrived, made threats, and called you." Greg interrupted with a roar. "She's lying. She's violent. She followed us from the parking lot." Lopez kept his expression neutral. "Sir, please let her finish." The growing crowd murmured. Dozens of phones were aimed at us, recording, capturing everything, the truth and the performance. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman whispered, "Isn't that the HOA president?" Another voice answered, "Looks like he's losing it." I folded my arms loosely, not defensive, just waiting. Years in law enforcement had taught me one thing: silence was often louder than shouting. Greg, desperate for attention, filled that silence with his own downfall. "You people come here and cause trouble," he spat. "This is a family neighborhood. We don't want criminals near our kids." Lopez's partner raised an eyebrow but stayed professional. "Sir, please step back. We'll review security footage before making any decisions." Greg threw up his hands dramatically. "Unbelievable. This is what's wrong with this city. You protect criminals and punish good citizens." That's when I spoke again, voice calm, even warm. "You know, Mr. Morrison, filing a false police report is a misdemeanor under Penal Code Section 148.5. You might want to read that before you start shouting in front of witnesses." He blinked, confused for a heartbeat before the meaning sank in. "You threatening me?" I smiled faintly. "No, sir. Just informing you." Behind him, Bradley's fake tears had stopped. He was watching me with a flicker of uncertainty, as if some part of him realized his father had made a terrible mistake. The other officers stepped in, separating us, interviewing witnesses, checking security cameras. One of them whispered something to Lopez, and I saw the sergeant's lips twitch. Not quite a smile, but close. He approached me discreetly. "Commander, you want us to handle this the usual way?" "Keep it quiet," I murmured. "No special treatment, just the truth." Within minutes, it was clear there was no evidence of assault, only Greg's aggression and his son's theft. The officers returned his phone, advising him not to misuse emergency services again. Greg's face burned red. "You'll regret this. You'll never step foot in my neighborhood again." I grabbed my receipt, my groceries, and turned toward the exit, the sliding doors hissing open like a curtain rising on a play's next act. Without breaking stride, I looked over my shoulder and said evenly, "Actually, Mr. Morrison, I already live there." Outside, the sirens faded, and the crowd's murmurs turned to whispers. Greg Morrison had no idea that the dangerous woman he tried to ruin had just walked straight into his world, his neighborhood, his HOA, and his undoing. He froze on his driveway, groceries spilling from his hands. Because the dangerous woman, He called 911 on was now unpacking boxes right across the street. I can still picture the look on Greg Morrison's face that afternoon. His jaw dropped so fast, I half expected it to hit the pavement. One grocery bag slipped from his fingers, cans rolling down the driveway like runaway marbles. His wife, Debbie, stood beside him, clutching her pearls, literally clutching them, as if I were some ghost risen from the grave of their privilege. I gave them a polite, neighborly wave. "Beautiful day to move in, isn't it?" I called out. Greg didn't answer. His face was a shade between fury and disbelief, like a man realizing he'd just called the cops on his new next-door neighbor. And worse, that she wasn't the one who should have been scared. Maplewood Estates was the kind of suburban dream people took pride in showing off. Manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, HOA bylaws thicker than a Bible. But beneath that polished surface, it didn't take long to see the cracks. The whispers, the unspoken hierarchy, the way certain neighbors stiffened when I walked by. It wasn't new to me. Racism rarely needed words. Sometimes it just needed glances. By that first evening, the HOA's social group chat, Maplewood Neighbors Unite, was already buzzing. "Did you hear about the new homeowner?" One message read, "She's the one who caused that scene at Fresh Mart." Another chimed in, "Heard she threatened the HOA president's son." Within hours, half the neighborhood had painted me as trouble. I hadn't even finished unpacking my dishes. Greg wasted no time making sure everyone knew the type of person who had moved in. The next morning, I found an HOA notice on my porch, violation, garbage can visible from the street. Funny thing was, I hadn't even unpacked my garbage can yet. Then came the noise. Loud country music blaring from the Morrisons' porch at 2 a.m., just loud enough to make sleeping impossible. Debbie stood in the doorway, wine glass in hand, pretending not to notice. When I finally stepped out and waved, the volume went up. The following night, I woke to find my trash can tipped over, garbage scattered across the lawn. It happened again the next morning, only this time, the garbage wasn't mine. Someone had dumped their bags deliberately. I didn't react. I just documented. Every photo, every note, every small act of harassment was time-stamped and saved. In my line of work, I'd learned that patience wins wars. That weekend, another letter appeared, this one from the HOA itself. "Dear Ms. Carter, we've received reports of concerning behavior. Please attend an emergency compliance review next week." No signature. Just the board. I smiled. They were circling the wagons. I was ready. That night, I installed 4 new security cameras. One disguised as a porch light, another inside the mailbox, a third embedded in my flower bed, and a final one facing directly across the street. I made sure the red indicator lights blinked just enough to be seen. If they were going to harass me, I wanted them to know I was watching too. Legal nugget. In most one-party consent states, like mine, it's completely legal to record conversations in video of property harassment as long as you're part of the interaction. And if there's one thing bullies hate more than exposure, it's evidence. The next morning, I found a single sheet of paper taped to my front door. Black marker, big block letters. "Move out or else." No name, no signature, just hate. I peeled it off gently, slid it into a plastic evidence sleeve, and opened my home security folder. In neat letters across the top, I typed, "Evidence number 1. Maplewood harassment case." Greg Morrison thought he was dealing with a scared woman. He had no idea he'd just started a file that would end his reign. Eggs cracked against my door at 2 a.m. Slurs covered my garage by dawn. But every second of their hate was already saved to 4 hidden cameras. It started small, almost childish. The kind of harassment you'd expect from bored teenagers, not grown adults with HOA titles. The first night, I woke to the sound of something wet smacking against my front door. I flipped on the porch light to find yolks sliding down the glass, glistening under the yellow glow. A sour smell filled the air. Fresh, raw, deliberate. The next morning, 3 of my flower beds were destroyed. Soil kicked up, petals torn. And right in the center of it all, dog droppings. Big ones. Not random strays. These belonged to the Morrisons' 3 Labradors, who, I noticed, were now conveniently roaming, accidentally, off-leash every night. By the 3rd day, the attacks grew bolder. My mailbox was smashed in. A trail of paint led from the curb up to my driveway, where someone had sprayed the word "out" in sloppy white letters across my garage door. I didn't even have to guess who it was. The cameras caught it all. At 1:46 a.m., Bradley Morrison crept across the street in a hoodie, clutching a can of spray paint. He looked around nervously, then started tagging my property with racial slurs he probably barely understood. From her porch, Debbie Morrison stood in a silk robe, recording the entire act on her phone while pretending to call the dogs back. When Bradley finished, she actually clapped. The footage made my blood boil, but my training kicked in before my anger could. I hit pause, rewound, and saved the video to 3 separate drives. One local, one cloud, one encrypted. Years in law enforcement had taught me that bullies always rely on intimidation. They never plan for evidence. Later that morning, while I was scrubbing the slurs off my garage, Linda Hayes, my next-door neighbor, approached hesitantly. Linda was in her 50s, kind eyes, always trimming her hedges to perfection. She kept glancing over her shoulder as she spoke. "Alicia," she whispered, "I probably shouldn't say this, but you're not the first." I stopped wiping and turned to her. "What do you mean?" She looked down. "The last 3 families who lived here before you, they were all minorities. 1 Hispanic couple, 1 black family, and a single mom from India. All gone within months. Greg made their lives hell. HOA violations, fines, noise complaints, you name it. Each time they moved out, and Greg bragged about preserving neighborhood standards. My chest tightened. I'd read the community turnover records. 3 properties sold unusually fast over 2 years. Now I knew why. Linda sighed. "Be careful, Alicia. He plays dirty. But I can already tell, you're not like the others." She was right. I wasn't. I wasn't going anywhere. That night, I reviewed every clip, every still frame, every timestamp. I organized them chronologically. Vandalism, NOZO1 JPG. Harassment, WOZO2, MP4. Audio threat, WOZO3, .wav. Each file uploaded automatically to secure cloud storage. I even printed a few stills and stored them in a physical binder. Old habits die hard. The evidence folder was thickening by the day, and I knew one thing for sure. When I moved, I'd moved into a battlefield. Still, I didn't strike back. Not yet. Patience was my weapon. I'd let them write the case against themselves, one stupid act at a time. A week later, Linda knocked on my door again, her face pale. "He's doing it," she said quietly. I frowned. "Doing what?" She swallowed hard. "Greg just called an emergency HOA meeting, and it's about you." I didn't flinch. I closed my laptop, the soft click echoing like the cocking of a gun. "Good," I said. "Let's make it official." "This woman is a threat," Greg barked at the crowd, pointing at a blown-up photo of me projected on the wall. The slideshow was titled "The Alicia Problem." His voice boomed through the Maplewood Estates community hall like a preacher delivering a sermon of fear. What he didn't realize was that I had my own slideshow ready. Mine was titled "The Evidence." The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I slipped quietly into the back row, unnoticed at first. The room was packed, neighbors whispering, murmuring, pretending not to stare. Plastic chairs squeaked as people leaned toward each other. Every HOA meeting had its share of drama, but this one had the air of a courtroom. Greg stood center stage, pacing like he was running for office. His wife Debbie sat in the front row, chin high, eyes gleaming with superiority. "Neighbors," Greg began dramatically, tapping his laser pointer on my picture. "This woman moved into our community under questionable circumstances. She's aggressive, disrespectful, and has already caused multiple disturbances. Last week she threatened my son." He paused, letting gasps ripple through the crowd. The next slide flashed onto the screen, grainy footage of me standing near my mailbox, cropped to make it look like I was shouting. Then another photo. My garage door with paint stains, edited to remove the racist slurs his son had written. She defaced her own property to get sympathy, Greg declared. This is attention-seeking behavior. We must act before this escalates. I sat there, silent, heart steady. Every officer I'd ever trained knew that silence was strategy. You let the guilty reveal themselves before you ever step into the light. Several neighbors nodded uncertainly, others frowned. A few exchanged glances that said, "This doesn't add up." But Greg wasn't finished. He clicked to the next slide, a fake HOA notice he claimed I ignored, followed by a blurred image of me watering my plants. "See?" he said, stabbing the laser toward the screen. "Always watching. Always recording us. This isn't normal behavior." Someone in the crowd muttered, "You installed the HOA cameras." Laughter broke the tension for half a second, and Greg's face turned red. He slammed his fist on the podium. "Enough jokes. This woman is dangerous, and as HOA president, I move for an immediate vote to begin removal proceedings." That was my cue. I stood slowly, the scraping of my chair echoing in the hushed room. Heads turned. Greg's smile faltered for the first time that night. "Mr. Morrison," I said calmly, walking toward the front, "before you vote, may I respond?" He hesitated. "You've already said enough." I raised an eyebrow. HOA Bylaws Section 7.3. Any homeowner accused of misconduct is entitled to present a rebuttal before disciplinary votes. You wouldn't want to break your own rules, would you? A few chuckles from the audience. Greg clenched his jaw. "Fine. Make it quick." I took out my phone, plugged it into the projector, and tapped play. The first video filled the wall. Bradley Morrison stealing my groceries at Fresh Mart, shouting racial slurs. The audio was crystal clear. The second clip rolled immediately after. Bradley spray painting my garage, Debbie laughing from their porch. Every whisper in the room died. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone near the back whispered, "Oh my God, that's her footage." Another voice, "That's his son." Greg's face drained of color. "She doctored it. Deep fakes. She's trying to frame us." I tilted my head, keeping my tone even. "All timestamps match your home's own surveillance network, Mr. Morrison. Your HOA cameras." Legal nugget number 3. Under state housing law, HOAs cannot remove residents or take disciplinary action without documented, verifiable cause. Fabricated evidence qualifies as harassment and fraud. The silence stretched until it snapped. One of the board members, an older man who'd been nodding along moments earlier, cleared his throat. "Greg, this doesn't look good." Greg's lip trembled. "She's lying," he spat. "You're all blind." I unplugged my phone, met his glare, and smiled. "And Mr. Morrison," I said softly, stepping closer so only the microphone could catch my words, "you haven't even asked who I am." The room buzzed, tension crackling like static. Greg blinked, confusion twisting into fear. That question, and its answer, would destroy him soon enough. He demanded, "Who even are you?" And the room held its breath like a camera waiting for the director's cut. I stepped forward, shoes whispering on linoleum, and placed my badge on the podium with a soft final thud. The fluorescent lights caught the polished metal and spun tiny stars across the ceiling. For a second, everything went thin and electric. The clicking of phones, the scraping of chairs, a woman's sudden intake of breath. Then the hall filled with the startled noise of neighbors realizing they were watching the end of a very long story. When I slid the badge across the table, the ripple of recognition moved through the room slower than a rumor, but heavier than regret. Faces shifted. The smugness in Greg Morrison's posture faltered and then collapsed like a poorly built fence. A board member who had been nodding at Greg's fabrications looked suddenly younger, ashamed, as if the weight of responsibility had been returned to him in one clean, undeniable object. Phones pivoted. Cameras leaned forward. Someone said, "Is that?" and couldn't finish. I didn't say anything more at first. Instead, I cued the next clip on my phone and let the audio do the work. The speakers filled the room with Greg's own voice. Urgent, panicked, demanding 20 cars, and insisting I was dangerous. He shouted about kids at risk and used language that had no place in a civil neighborhood. Hearing himself outside the performative safety of his living room, his words sounded thin and brittle. The recording snapped like a twig under boot. People winced as if hit. The board's murmur turned to a serious hum. Someone in the back whispered, "That sounds like our HOA president." Another neighbor, a retired teacher I'd seen at every community bake sale, covered her mouth with both hands. The gravity of what Greg had done. Calling emergency services to manufacture a threat, weaponizing police resources, and smearing a neighbor, settled over the room like a winter fog. You could see the calculations in people's faces. Liability, insurance, moral shame. I looked at the board table where their bylaws and meeting agenda sat cooling beneath a stack of coffee cups. I addressed them directly, steady as a metronome. "This is not garden gossip. This is a misuse of emergency services and deliberate harassment. Hearing this audio with your own ears should make clear why we can't ignore it." I watched the lead director, Richard, flip through the HOA code, then meet my gaze with something like permission. I offered a legal frame, brief and clear. Legal nugget: bias-motivated false reports can trigger federal hate crime considerations under statutes that recognize targeted intimidation when motivated by race, religion, or national origin. This elevates what might look like a misdemeanor into a matter with federal implications depending on intent and impact. The sentence landed. People understood that this wasn't petty neighborhood drama. It was potentially criminal behavior aimed at forcing someone out of their home. A hush fell as Richard cleared his throat and, with visible reluctance, called for an immediate vote to suspend Greg from his duties pending investigation. The motion passed with more hands than I expected. A slow, unanimous ripple that made Greg's face blanch. I could see him recalculating his options, the pride leaking out like air from a punctured tire. As the gavel came down and phones recorded the paper trail, Greg pivoted toward me, fury exploding into something raw and animal. He leaned forward, lips pulled tight, and screamed, "You'll pay for this!" His voice cracked on the last word, carrying through the hall like an accusation and a promise both. The room recoiled. I gathered my badge, feeling its weight in my palm like the truth made solid. Around me, cameras buzzed. Neighbors whispered into their phones. I walked toward the door through a corridor of turned faces, each pair of eyes cataloging the moment and saving it, digitally and irreversibly. Outside, the cool air felt like absolution. Greg's cry followed me into the hallway, but it no longer sounded like power. It sounded like an enemy surprised by consequence. By sunrise, his name was everywhere. The HOA president who called the cops on the police chief. His phone wouldn't stop ringing, and not a single call was friendly. The badge drop video hit the internet before I even made it home that night. Someone in the audience had streamed the entire HOA meeting live, and within hours it exploded across social media. Clips of me sliding my badge across the table were looping endlessly on every platform: Twitter, TikTok, Facebook. The caption read, "HOA president calls cops on the police commander." By morning, every local outlet had picked it up. By noon, national ones had too. Reporters camped outside the Maplewood Estates gate, cameras trained on the Morrison residence. The image of Greg's slack-jawed shock became a meme overnight, while his words, "You'll pay for this," were remixed into 100 parody videos. It would have been funny if it wasn't so predictable. Greg's employer, a high-end real estate firm, issued a statement before sunrise. "We do not condone discrimination or abuse of public services." Effective immediately, Greg Morrison is terminated for ethical breaches. His headshot vanished from the company website within hours. The local business magazine that once praised him as Maplewood's power broker replaced his photo with mine, under the headline "Justice in Suburbia." The HOA board scrambled to save face. An emergency email went out to all residents, trying to distance the association from Greg's behavior. Maplewood Estates does not tolerate racism or harassment, it read. I knew that line was more about liability than morality, but it was still a start. Inside the Morrison house, though, things were unraveling fast. Debbie drew the blinds and stayed off her porch. The woman who once strutted through neighborhood gatherings like a self-proclaimed queen bee suddenly vanished from sight. Their son Bradley wasn't as lucky. Someone had leaked the security footage of him spray-painting slurs on my garage door. Within hours, his high school suspended him indefinitely for hate-related vandalism. His friends turned on him online. The comments were brutal. For the first time, the arrogant smirk on his face wasn't a weapon. It was evidence. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post. I didn't say a word. Silence was my strategy. I stayed focused, compiling documentation for internal review and ensuring the investigation followed every protocol. Every harassment incident I'd recorded, every fake violation letter, every frame of video, archived, dated, secure. Meanwhile, Greg's spiral into self-destruction began online. He opened his HOA president's Facebook page and started posting rants that got uglier by the minute. The media twisted my words. One post read, "That woman framed me." Another claimed I wasn't really the police chief at all, that I'd faked my credentials. It would have been laughable if it hadn't drawn the wrong kind of crowd. People eager to believe any story that absolved him. But digital lies have short lives when facts are bulletproof. The police department's official account posted a statement within hours. Commander Alicia Carter is a decorated veteran with 22 years of service. We stand firmly by her integrity and professionalism. That alone was enough to silence most of his defenders. Greg wasn't done, though. The more the world turned against him, the louder he screamed into the void. Every post was angrier, less coherent, until finally one appeared that chilled me more than any insult before it. "If she wants war," he wrote at 3:17 a.m., "she's got it." The words were public for less than 10 minutes before Facebook moderators removed them, but not before I'd taken a screenshot. Evidence, always evidence. The next morning, I stood at my window, coffee in hand, watching reporters chase him down his driveway as he barked "no comment" to their microphones. I didn't smile, but inside, I knew one truth better than anyone else. Greg Morrison had declared war on the one person who recorded everything. He thought Facebook rumors could destroy me. I thought subpoenas and screenshots might work better. After the fallout, Greg Morrison reinvented himself, not as an HOA president, but as a full-time victim. His kingdom wasn't the cul-de-sac anymore. It was the internet. From behind a cracked laptop screen, he waged digital war. It started small, the way all smear campaigns do. Anonymous posts appeared in the Maplewood Residents Forum. "Did you know the new homeowner has a record? Someone said she falsified her badge." Maybe that press conference was staged. Each post came from a different username: Patriot Dad 27, Truth from Maplewood, Neighborhood Watch Hero. But they all sounded the same. Same phrasing, same rhythm, same venom. I'd seen trolls before. What Greg didn't understand was that I had an entire cybercrimes unit under my command. They didn't just read posts, they tracked them. By week's end, my IT team had traced every anonymous profile straight to one source: Greg Morrison's home IP address. The man who'd claimed to defend his neighborhood couldn't even hide behind a VPN. Rookie mistake. Still, I didn't act right away. I let him dig deeper. Each rant, each anonymous leak, each fake photo became one more thread in the web he was weaving around himself. My evidence folder was now the size of a small novel. Screenshots, IP logs, timestamps, all neatly labeled: digital harassment, Morrison, G. But Greg wasn't content with just online lies. He wanted headlines. I found that out one rainy Tuesday morning when a local blogger named Janet Klein called my office. Her voice trembled with guilt. "Commander Carter," she said quietly, "I think you should hear something." Janet explained that Greg had contacted her earlier that week with an offer $2,000 for a story exposing me as a fraud. He'd even promised to supply fake documents and screenshots. He said it would go viral, she added softly. I pretended to agree just so I could record the call. You'll want to hear this. I met Janet in a coffee shop that afternoon, her laptop open to the audio file. Greg's voice came through loud and clear, arrogant, confident, self-assured. $2,000, Janet. Easy money. Write whatever you need. Say she's got a complaint record. Something about corruption. People already hate her. They'll believe anything. There was a pause. Then his voice dropped lower, colder. Make sure it sounds official. Once that story's up, she's finished. The audio alone was damning, but the metadata was even better. It showed the recording was made from his personal cell phone. Legal nugget defamation and online harassment aren't protected speech. When false claims are made with intent to harm reputation, they become actionable offenses, both civil and criminal. Intent is the key, and Greg had just gift-wrapped it for me. That night, I sat in my office, listening to the rain tap against the windows while I compiled everything. Screenshots of his posts, server logs, and the audio file. I even printed his "If she wants war, she's got it" post and added it to the binder. Evidence wasn't just my shield, it was my sword. When I was done, I leaned back in my chair and opened my calendar. It was time to end this war publicly. The next morning, my assistant, Sergeant Lopez, poked his head into my doorway. "You sure about this, Commander?" he asked. I nodded. Completely. He smiled faintly. "Then I'll make the calls." Within hours, every major local news outlet had the same invite in their inbox. Press conference, community safety and accountability, LED by Police Commander Alicia Carter. The press didn't know it yet, but Maplewood's dirtiest secret was about to become headline news. He showed up with a speech about community safety. Too bad I walked in first, wearing the uniform he swore I'd never earn. City Hall was already buzzing when I arrived. Rows of reporters filled every seat, microphones lined up like bayonets at the edge of the podium. The lights were brutal, white-hot and merciless. Outside, camera crews jockeyed for position, their vans clogging the street. On the banner behind me, the city's seal gleamed under the spotlights. Oak Ridge Police Department. Press briefing on community integrity. At the front of the crowd, sitting squarely in the middle row, was Greg Morrison. He wore his best gray suit, hair slicked back, jaw tight with self-righteous determination. He had no idea the storm that was about to hit him. To the untrained eye, he looked confident. A stack of papers sat neatly in his lap. His statement. I could already imagine what it said. Lies, distortions, and a desperate attempt to reclaim the narrative. His wife, Debbie, sat beside him, wearing sunglasses indoors, pretending she didn't see the whispers or the cell phones pointed their way. The meeting had been billed as a press event about community safety, vague enough that Greg assumed it was his chance to expose me. He'd even posted about it on the HOA page that morning. Big day. The truth about our so-called police commander will finally come out. Poor man. He didn't read the fine print. At exactly 3 o'clock, I stepped through the side door in full dress uniform, medals polished, badge gleaming, posture straight as steel. The murmurs died instantly. The sound of my heels against the marble echoed across the chamber. Greg turned, saw me, and blinked as if his brain couldn't process what he was seeing. What is she doing up there?" he hissed to his wife. The press had already turned their cameras toward me. Flashbulbs exploded like fireworks as I reached the podium. I adjusted the microphone and let the silence stretch just long enough for everyone to lean in. "Good afternoon," I said evenly. "I'm Commander Alicia Carter of the Oak Ridge Police Department. Thank you all for being here. Today we're addressing a series of incidents that occurred in the Maplewood Estates community. Incidents involving harassment, false police reports, and targeted intimidation." Greg shot to his feet, waving his folder. "Lies," he shouted. "This woman is dangerous. She—" "Sit down, Mr. Morrison," I said calmly, not looking at him. "You'll want to see this." Behind me, the screen lit up with the first video, the 911 call. Greg's voice blared through the speakers, high and panicked. "Send 20 cars, she's threatening my family." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Even the reporters looked stunned. Greg's face turned the color of raw meat. Next came the footage from my security cameras. Bradley, his son, spray painting racial slurs on my garage while Debbie watched, laughing. Gasps filled the hall. A woman in the audience stood up whispering, "That's disgusting." Then came the final clip, the audio of Greg offering $2,000 to blogger Janet Klein for a fabricated story about me. His voice was unmistakable. "Just say she's corrupt. People will believe it." Greg's papers slipped from his hands, scattering like fallen leaves across the floor. His wife covered her mouth. Her sunglasses didn't hide her shock anymore. "This," I said, turning back to the crowd, "is what happens when people believe their title gives them power over truth." Reporters were already typing furiously, cameras zooming in. Every word, every sound was being broadcast live. "Under state law," I continued, "filing a false police report and using bias as motivation qualifies as harassment, and when targeted based on race or position, it meets the threshold for hate-based misconduct. The evidence you've just seen has been reviewed and verified by the district attorney's office." Greggy lunged halfway to his feet again. "You can't." "Gregory Morrison," I said firmly, voice amplified through the hall. "You are under arrest for filing false police reports, aggravated harassment, and attempted defamation." The two officers I'd brought with me stepped forward from the side of the stage. Their uniforms gleamed, their handcuffs ready. "You asked for 20 police cars," I told him softly as they closed in. "I brought 2 for you." The cameras exploded in a blinding storm of flashes. Greg's face twisted in disbelief. He tried to speak, but the words never came. His knees buckled and he fainted right there on the marble floor, crumpling like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Debbie screamed his name, rushing forward, but the officers were already kneeling beside him, checking his pulse. "He's fine," one said dryly. "Just shock." Reporters surged forward, shouting questions. "Commander Carter, was this planned? Did you expect him to show up? What happens now?" I straightened my jacket, looked directly into the nearest camera lens, and answered simply, "What happens now is justice." Then I stepped down from the podium as the flashing lights chased me out the door, Greg groaning behind me, the echo of cuffs clicking shut filling the hall. Outside, the headlines were already being written. And inside, Greg Morrison's war had officially ended, with his own words as the smoking gun. "Please, Your Honor, I didn't mean it," he cried. The same mouth that ordered my arrest now begged for mercy in front of a packed courtroom. The courthouse smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, a mix of nerves and consequence. Every seat was taken. Reporters lined the back row, notebooks open, cameras perched on tripods. On the other side of the aisle sat the residents of Maplewood Estates, faces pale with the shock of seeing their former HOA president in a county-issued suit. Greg Morrison looked smaller now. His once perfect hair hung limp, his suit too big, hands trembling on the defense table. His wife Debbie sat 2 rows behind him, sunglasses hiding tears or shame, it was hard to tell which. And Bradley, the teenage accomplice, slumped in the juvenile section, his face drained of the cocky confidence he once flaunted. The trial had become the talk of the county. For weeks the story had dominated headlines. HOA president accused of hate crimes against police chief neighbor. People wanted to see how justice handled hypocrisy. When it was my turn to testify, I took the stand without a hint of satisfaction. I had no need to gloat. The evidence spoke for itself. Calmly, I recounted each event. The grocery store incident, the vandalism, the harassment, the online defamation. Screens behind me played short clips. Greg's frantic 911 call demanding 20 cars. Bradley's spray painting spree. Greg's voice offering a blogger money to smear my name. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of the projector. The prosecutor, an older woman with a voice like steel wrapped in silk, asked her final question. "Commander Carter, at any point, Did you retaliate or provoke the Morrisons? No, I answered simply. I just documented. The judge, Honorable Judge Ramirez, nodded slowly, expression unreadable. Then she turned to Greg. Mr. Morrison, this court has seen arrogance before, but rarely the kind fueled by both racism and self-importance. You abused your power, weaponized your HOA, and attempted to manipulate law enforcement. The irony that you called the police on their own commander. Well, that's poetic justice. A wave of murmurs rolled through the courtroom. Greg's lawyer rose quickly. Your Honor, my client deeply regrets his actions. He has no prior record, and this entire ordeal has already cost him his career and reputation. The judge leaned forward. Regret after exposure is not repentance, counsel. Then, turning back to Greg, she continued. This court sentences you to 2 years of probation, a $25,000 fine, and 500 hours of community service focused specifically on racial equity and community relations. You will also complete a certified bias awareness program at your expense. Consider this leniency a second chance to be the neighbor you pretended to be. Greg collapsed into his chair, the sound of his exhale half sob, half relief. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder, but he didn't look up. Then came Bradley's turn. His juvenile trial was brief. His guilt wasn't in question. The videos of him spray painting racial slurs were undeniable. The judge's words to him were simple but searing. You're 16, old enough to know hate when you see it, and old enough to say no to it. You will spend 90 days in juvenile detention and perform 500 hours of supervised community service. Let this be your education in humanity. When the gavel fell, it wasn't applause I felt like giving. It was a deep, quiet exhale. Justice had done what it was meant to do. Within a week, the Maplewood HOA formally voted to remove Greg Morrison as president. His assets were frozen pending civil suits from other former residents he'd harassed. For the first time in years, Maplewood Estates held an election that didn't revolve around fear. A month later, during a routine community patrol, I saw something that gave me pause. A cleanup crew was trimming hedges by the highway. Among them was a familiar face, Bradley, wearing an orange vest, sweat dripping down his temples as he picked up trash. Our eyes met briefly. He looked away first, and for the first time, I didn't see arrogance in that boy. I saw consequence. He was thinner now, quieter. The boy who once spray-painted slurs on my house stood before me in an orange vest, whispering, "I'm sorry." It was a warm afternoon in late spring, sunlight bouncing off the polished chrome of city maintenance trucks as a group of community service workers cleaned up the parkway. I was doing a casual patrol, checking progress reports, when I spotted him, Bradley Morrison, shovel in one hand, trash bag in the other. He froze when he saw me. For a second, I thought he might run. Then his grip tightened, his shoulders slumped, and he just stood there trembling. The tough kid who once strutted across my lawn had disappeared. In his place was a teenager who'd finally met his own reflection. "Commander Carter," he said softly. I didn't know you'd be here." "Neither did I replied. "But maybe that's how these things work out." He looked down at the asphalt. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. For the things I said. For what I did to your house. For making you feel like you didn't belong." His voice cracked on the last word, and the emotion in it wasn't rehearsed. It was raw. "I ruined everything. My school, my reputation, my future." I watched him for a moment, letting the silence breathe between us. "Your future isn't gone," I told him. "It's just damaged. Damage can be repaired. Gone means you stopped trying." He looked up, confused but hopeful. I pulled a card from my pocket and handed it to him. Second Chance Youth Program. They help young people rebuild their lives after bad choices. They won't erase what you did, but they'll help you learn from it. His eyes filled. "You'd really help me? After everything?" "I'm not helping you," I said gently. "I'm giving you a chance to help yourself." He nodded, gripping the card like a lifeline. I won't waste it. I promise. That afternoon stayed with me, not because it erased what had happened, but because it reminded me why I'd chosen this job in the first place. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment, it's about perspective. Months later, Linda Hayes stopped by my house with a smile that could light up a room. "You'll never guess who's at the community food bank every Saturday," she said. "Bradley?" I guessed. She nodded. "He's different now. Quiet, kind. He told one of the volunteers you gave him a second chance. Greg still sits online all day, ranting to strangers, but that boy, he's trying." I felt something warm settle in my chest. Not triumph, not vindication, just peace. That weekend, during the annual Maplewood Unity BBQ, Linda nudged me as I flipped burgers at the grill. "Look who's serving food now," she whispered. Across the park, wearing a clean volunteer apron, Bradley handed a plate to a young black family with a shy smile. The little girl said thank you. And this time, he smiled back. Kids laughed, grills smoked, and no one cared about skin color. This was the neighborhood Greg tried to destroy, and the one I swore to protect. A year had passed since the chaos that tore Maplewood Estates apart. The lawns looked greener now, not because the HOA demanded it, but because people actually cared again. The air no longer hummed with tension. It rang with laughter, music, and the smell of barbecue smoke drifting through the cul-de-sac. The Unity BBQ had become our new tradition, born out of something ugly but transformed into something beautiful. Families from every background gathered under the same tents, sharing food, stories, and second chances. Nobody mentioned bylaws. Nobody whispered about who belonged. It was just neighbors being neighbors. I stood by the grill with Linda Hayes, flipping burgers while she sipped her lemonade. "Hard to believe this is the same place," she said, eyes scanning the crowd. "Yeah," I replied. "Sometimes it takes a fire to rebuild the foundation." Across the park, Bradley Morrison handed out plates to kids lined up near the dessert table. His posture was humble now, his movements careful and deliberate. Every so often, he glanced my way, not out of guilt anymore, but gratitude. Growth had replaced arrogance, and redemption had replaced resentment. Linda smiled. "You did that, you know?" I shook my head. "No, he did that. I just gave him the chance." A small boy, maybe 7 or 8, ran up to me clutching a hot dog in both hands. "My mom says you're a hero," he said proudly. "She says you stopped the bad people." I knelt so I was eye level with him. "I'm not a hero, kiddo," I told him softly. "Real heroes are the ones who change when they realize they were wrong." He thought about it for a second, nodded seriously, then ran off toward the bounce house, shouting something about ketchup. As the sun dipped below the maple trees, the sound of children laughing echoed through the neighborhood Greg once ruled by fear. He'd moved away months ago, alone, bitter, still ranting online to no one who cared. I glanced around, the smell of grilled corn and wood smoke mixing with fresh-cut grass. Maplewood wasn't perfect, but it was whole again. HOA power stops where decency begins. Comment Karma Police if you believe justice always finds its way, I said, smiling into the camera lens for the final shot. And remember, never underestimate the quiet neighbor. She just might be the chief.